In this series, we have been looking at how to make remote work actually work for us because remote work is loudly praised by many and then just as loudly denounced by others. So, who is right? Well, it depends on how you prepare for it. So, in order for remote work to be smooth, we need to have three pillars in place: practicality, legality, and productivity. We started our series by focusing on the practicality pillar, and 6 videos later, we are finally ready to move on to the legal side of things. So, the question you want to answer affirmatively is everything in place to protect your company from any liability or potential legal issue that could come up because you have remote workers? That is what we want to achieve by building a legality pillar. So to answer this, we are going to have a look at 3 categories, starting with labor law, then company law, then general law, in order to build your legal pillar over the next couple of videos. So we're going to start with labor law. Labor law differs from country to country. So how it impacts you is going to depend on where your employee is sitting and the manner in which you appointed them. So if your remote worker is in your country and you have a standard employment contract with them, then the fact that you have allowed them to work from home does not absolve you from a single one of your normal labor law requirements. A remote worker who has a standard employment contract with you, governed by your country's legislation, is still entitled to the exact same rights and restrictions as your office workers. That includes working hours and overtime, leave, job descriptions, contracts, probation, feedback, training, disciplinaries, and performance reviews. So, what is different? So, you must stipulate in the employment contract that this employee is allowed to work from home and how often. So you need to state if it's a permanently remote position or a hybrid appointment. There must be no ambivalence. It must be clear. You must stipulate how their working hours are determined and how they're measured. So you need to actually stipulate whether you want them working at specific times. In other words, do you want them at their desk from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.? Or are their actual working hours up to them, provided that they complete 7.5 hours per day? You then need to stipulate in the contract how these hours are verified. Do they clock in and out on Teams, or is there another employee management system? Do they log hours in Clockify or Carbon or a similar timekeeping app? Your stipulated working hours and how you track those hours and how you verify those hours must be in writing in their employment contract. If you are outcomes based, you must again put this in writing in the contract. So then you need to explain how the outcomes are measured, how the performance is measured in regards of outcomes. Because now you might not require them to log 7.5 hours a day, but you do require a certain amount of work to be done. So you need to stipulate that in the contract or an addendum to the contract. When it comes to how things are measured, and especially if it's outcomes or specific hours, addendums can often be better because you can have a central unchanging contract and you just add addendums as you change workloads or clients allocated to this employee, but you can put them in the contract as well. If you have a mixed approach, again, it needs to go in writing. So as an example, my accounting firm has official operating hours from 8:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. So these are the hours I require my staff to be available to clients for queries and meetings. However, in terms of meeting their performance obligations, their time is their own. So they can do their actual work whenever it suits them, and it can take them as long as it needs to. If they meet their outcomes in 4 hours a day, they have 3.5 hours to spend how they wish. I don't care, so long as clients are happy, outcomes are appeased, and deadlines are met. But I state this very clearly in their contract, and I explain how those outcomes and performance is measured. The reason it is so important to make all of this clear in writing is because it is going to affect your performance reviews, your disciplinaries, and by extension, it affects your terminations. So if you are operating in a company such as a country, such as the UK or South Africa, where you cannot just fire an employee without due process, then, that will still apply to remote workers. And that means you need to know what your due process is. You need to put it in writing, and you need your remote worker to know how you will be following your due process. So all of this is if your remote worker is in your country and has a standard employment contract with you. All your normal legislation applies, but you must be sure that you have written a contract that explains how it applies to a remote working situation. But what happens if your remote worker is in another country? Now, 99% of the time, if you manage to secure a remote worker in another country, you have done so through a third party, such as us, Human Edge. We will have found a remote worker for you. If that is the case, your third party should have done their homework regarding your labor laws, and they should have set up your contracts with your remote workers in such a way that they correspond to what you are used to as much as is possible. But there do tend to be some differences. So I'm going to use Human Edge as an example here. We provide UK accounting firms with remote working talent that is sitting in South Africa. So we employ the talent, we take the legislative risk and the administrative burden, and you just get a new team member. But in order for that to work, you do need to make a slight allowance for leave and for performance, because there's two things that our South African government gives us zero flexibility for, and that is sick leave days and what constitutes due process in a dismissal. For everything else, you can apply the policies you want to, the ones you are used to, the way that your HR is set up is fine, and we will have managed to align our contracts to those policies so that there's no difference. But in the case of sick leave, we have to give an employee 30 days of paid sick leave in a 3-year cycle. So if they are sick, they get 30 days fully paid within every 3 years. And we cannot not do that. And when it comes to due process for dismissal, we have to prove that we tried to remedy the situation first. So we have to have certain steps in place before you can just get rid of an employee. Now, because those two things have no leeway, we have to ask our UK clients to abide by them as well. We make it as easy as possible for you to do so. And we put things in place where we explain how, and we cover you as much as we can, but you do need to apply to those two things to your current approach. In every other labor law instance, you can operate as usual. So if your employee is in your country, the fact that they work from home doesn't change your employer obligations in any shape or form. And if they sit outside of your country, you might have to adapt your HR approach a little bit depending on where they are sitting. So those are the things you need to bear in mind when it comes to labor law and a remote worker. If you have questions around the details, please do drop me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn. That's Tamradix on LinkedIn, and send me a DM. In the next video, we're going to be looking at company law and the protections that you need in place there.